First of all, I want to say we are recording this event and we need your permission for that. And if you disagree, please tell us in the chat very quickly. Okay. Hi.
And social media. And also using social media.
I'm supposed to, and also social media. All right, let's get started. Welcome to Rural Widowhood, Culture, COVID, Conflict, and Climate Crisis, sponsored by Widows for Peace Through Democracy, WPD, and co-sponsored by the Global Call to Action Against Poverty, GCAP. This is a most important event with many voices of rural widows, women widows from different countries speaking to the needs of rural widows. Our speakers and respondents Nigeria, Uganda, the Congo, Liberia, the UK, Cameroon, Ukraine, and India. Bangladesh. Oh, yes. I'm so excited. I'm so excited about, yes. Okay.
How do I say something in the chat?
We want to hear about your work, but also, if appropriate, what is the most, the action your government could take to help widows? And what actions are you involved in furthering widows? To UN General Assembly Widowhood Resolution. That's Resolution 72. And if you haven't read it, go read it. It is so exciting. UN Security Council 1325, the WPD Widows Charter, and the SDGs. The SDGs will get nowhere without us. I just want to remind you that. Okay, now our event will last, we have this for 2 hours. Each speaker and respondent will have 7 minutes. Please put your questions in the chat so we can have a discussion afterwards. Now, we have quite long bios from each person, but I think we're going to send those out afterwards to you all. Our first speaker is Rosaline Orwa, founder and CEO of the Rona Foundation, and she's from Kenya. Welcome, Rosaline.
Hi, everyone. Good to see all new friends and all widow activists here. We are hosting this event when Kenya is just coming from a long drought and inflation, politics. So in the context of rural widowhood, that means a lot. It means job loss, it means loss of incomes, it means mental health. It also means distant public services. And especially now that we've just celebrated the International Women's Day, and we were saying digit it all, the language of digit it all. Rural widows lack that language. So I'm coming to this meeting with all that in mind and bearing the stories of those widows whose stories we come to tell here. Problems. I see culturalization of widowhood, disguised as good practices, and we know as widows that it is harmful traditional practices. I see gender-based violence in the context of culture. I see discrimination, and I see stigmatization almost in every day. Today on social media, I've been tagged on a post where a widow's eye was stabbed by in-laws, and she's lost an eyesight and through surgery. So we see lack of agency, we see no efficacy, both individually and collectively, and the language with which widows can speak, language that is legal, that is understandable. The second thing I see is the devaluation of women with dead husbands. In the context of where I work in Western Kenya in Siaya, the value of a woman is largely tagged on marital status and without which these two, a woman with a dead husband is victimized and actually rendered invisible, using the concept of grow small, smaller, and then disappear. it's more commonly used around widows with no education, younger widows, and we are in the context of a motorcycle industry where a number of widows lose their husbands due to motorcycle accidents. So they just grow small and smaller and then disappear. And all the conflicts and discrimination, disinheritance that comes with the evaluation of women with dead husbands. The third thing I see is violence against rural widows is perpetrated by people they know or people that are familiar with them. Nobody attacks a widow in the rural context that they don't know. Mostly it's familiar relatives and people known to them. And what does that mean? It means that even if the laws work, even if gender violence, even if sexual harassment, the people that will target widows for discrimination, disinheritance, are people known to them under the disguise of culture. So I see gaps in law. I see frameworks that are perhaps programming that are not targeting them because they are being, well, whoever is assumed to protect you, mostly in the long run is the one who will be targeting you for violence or disinheritance. What am I suggesting? I'm suggesting 3 solutions. I see space and opportunity in policy reforms, especially using the UN Widowhood Resolution as a framework. We are also using the Widows Charter by Widows for Peace Through Democracy that was drafted by Margaret Owen here. And I see a big opportunity for local governments to outlaw and criminalize harmful widowhood practices. I think the time is now. The UN Widowhood Charter gives that framework for counties, government, local governments to outlaw and criminalize harmful widowhood practices, and the time is now. I see an opportunity for a non-profit organization in programming towards gender-based violence and improve quality of relations between widows and their relatives, between widows and their local governments, so that widows can also begin to access, including control resources, especially assets of production. So I see a situation where bridging the gap and bond between social capital at the community and family level becoming a programming issue, and it's an opportunity that nonprofit, the network that exists here, can tap into. I also see an opportunity for community, county, and national level to focus their programming on access to decision-making spaces. I am a strong believer that nothing is for us without us. And so that widows could be in the space where they can speak the language of policymaking, they can transform and change policies. The policies that are widow aware and budgets that are widow informed. So there's a big opportunity, and especially in our context of Kenya, where widows can also be included, should be included in decision-making spaces, both at local level, in boards, in government appointments, so that representation cuts horizontally and vertically. And lastly, I believe that collectively, as a group of non-profits that are centered on widows, we have a really huge role, especially looking at our local context of in the continent here. That if Kenya gets it right, maybe Uganda will get it right, maybe Malawi will get it right. But we have to go to the last woman on the line, get her included, get her heard, so that we don't also continue to speak to ourselves. We also give room for the widow who's not in the room. I've been a widow for 14 years now, a childless widow, and I still believe there's enough space to get more widows in the room. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Clap for you.
That was excellent. It's so wonderful to hear about using the widow's resolution to implement it. We need to move to implementation and widows in decision making. Our next speaker. Oh, yeah, but I have to find out. Wait a second. Our next speaker is Jacqueline Musagani, and she is from, excuse my poor French, Initiative des Femmes en Situation Difficile pour le Développement Durable and Intégré Congo. He is the co-founder. No, wait a minute, excuse me here. Here we are. Yes, okay. Please speak. I'm looking for very much, oh, this will also be translated. It will be in French and also in English. Thank you.
Excuse me, maybe we can explain the translation that everybody knows.
In order to
Yeah.
access the translation, please select at the bottom of your screen the interpretation feature and select English. There should be a little round world that says interpretation, and there you can select English. If you're on the phone, it might be slightly different in options and more, and there you can select English. Et Jacqueline, vous avez la parole.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. We are talking about rural AIDS in Congo in the context of conflict, of COVID, and of climate change and social injustice. The widow women are often victims of a lot of injustice and social injustice in Congo. In the customs of many provinces of the country, the death of the partner is the cause of the loss of all the rights of the widow. If we consider the percentage of widows in the rural fields, we can say that there are 50% of widows in rural areas. We can also say that even in the big cities, there can be almost 50% of widows, or maybe 30% of widows. Here in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the widows consist of a forgotten class. They suffer of silence and have no social and economic help. This situation is even more dramatic when we talk about the widows of war crimes. My name is Jacqueline. I am the coordinator of the Organization for Women in Difficult Crisis and Integral Development. I'm also the director of an organization considering the rights of widow women. Here, I am myself a widow. 8 years ago, my husband died. We were based in the east of Congo, and we work with more than 700 rural widows. In the part of this country, a widow that lives in a village is a forgotten woman, forgotten by society. They do not benefit of most of their rights, including rights for inheritance. The members of the in-laws families will grab all the lands and the inheritance that she should get. That means the land, but also the produce of the land and of cattle breeding. It is more unjust knowing that it is in the rural areas that conflicts have intensified these last years. Widows are also the victims of many gender-based violences and rape. They are without defense, which is why they are at the mercy of the armed men and the warriors. According to testimonies that I gathered during interviews, a lot of women have been subjected to rapes in the presence of their children or their families. They are condemned to suffering in silence of all this injustice and sexual violence. They have lost their husband during wars, either assassinated or either dead because of the misery provoked by war or injuries provoked by war. Losing all of their goods, their land, their inheritance, they are plunged in misery and suffer from lack of decent houses. There is the case of women who have several children but have to live in one room. There is no separation between men and women, so the widow spends all the nights with all the children girls and boys. Their children don't go to school, and the children do not have access to healthcare. A lot of them have victims of heart attack, stomach aches. A lot of them suffer from diabetes or malnutrition, and the children also. Their life expectancy do not goes above 45 years old because of all these problems. After the death of their husband, the women are deprived from the goods of their husband. They face moral harassment by their in-laws or other badly intentioned people. Being a widow in the village is a curse because we see how the women live in, how the widows live in rural areas. I was telling you that I was myself a widow. I am myself a widow, and I have faced such experiences. During the COVID, 80% of COVID crisis, 80% of widows have faced crisis. They have lost their revenues in the informal sector, or they have faced contamination because of the pandemic. A lot of widows have been exposed to this pandemic. Almost 20% of them have died, unfortunately, leaving their children orphans and at the mercy of all the dangers, misery, lack of education, lack of housing, because a lot of villages lack of access to cities, of roads to cities. These are the problems that here exist concerning widows in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They cannot move to go to healthcare facilities and hospitals. They face more concerning vaccination, access to vaccination in the country. No mention was made, special mention was made for widows and their children. Also, the climate changes issue are very present in the rural areas. The fields and the houses are destroyed because of flooding. The connections between towns and villages are cut. There is also the problem of droughts causing hunger. The widows are more victims of climate change, as they are left behind to their own problems. Because of climate change, the widows and their orphans are more exposed to hunger and to malnutrition, with all the sanitary consequences expected. Therefore, we fight to gather all of these widows, because the widows coming from rural areas, because of the insecurities of the village, they have moved. So we work with displaced widows who came from territories, who came around big cities, who fled their region in hosting families and are facing very difficult situation. Our mission is to gather all of these women, the 150 women with whom we work. We organize learning activities of small work, like making soap, which is the aim of it is automation. We help these widows in their agricultural automation. We are with fertilizing plants to have more production, because the lands in the regions are not fertile. So we help women to produce more by fertilizing. We use soja beans, because by planting soybeans, we have seen that it is a plant that helps fertilizing the ground. So we teach that to widows. we give the widows opportunities to talk about their lives. During this learning workshop, the widows have the occasion to speak freely because they are common to one another. They feel in a safe space, and so they can try to overcome their trauma, talk about it. And it's for us the occasion to learn more about the struggles they face. Talking about their struggles, we give them advices. We give advices and we can give them a bit of relief. Interpreter has lost connection with the speaker. We help the widows to find to rebuild confidence and give them opportunities to speak. I want to share myself some of my experience. I share myself some of my experience and I encourage them, and I want to show them that when we are together, we can overcome trauma and help ourselves and learn more. So there's no way for the widow. The trauma of the widows are similar, which is why we help one another to help ourselves. But it's not always easy because what we are facing here in the East, more particularly in the city of province where we are, it's not easy because the situation, the security situation is very difficult. So that's what we are doing to help the well-being of the widows, and also by trying to help them on learning, economic questions, etc. We're a bit limited. This is why we fight, because they are really deep in misery. They are lack economic power, as I said, economic housing, and lack of juridical help. And to finish, what we want is that our government could take into account the situation of widows. We want to, so that we can vote a law in the parliament that could protect the widows in the Democratic Republic of Congo, because we try to make statistics about widows. When we go to the Ministry of Social Affairs, we only record the numbers of widows, but we don't take account for all of them because they're so numerous. We work with over 750 widows, and it's difficult to account for all of them. So we want that the government could really take them into account because they are forgotten. We have to take into account their situation and to vote a law that protects them, and that we can also help on the social, economical, access to credit, etc., etc. So this is what I want. I want to finish by thanking all of those who advocate for the rights of widows on the international level, and that helped the vote of a resolution that protects and take account of widows. And it's for us an occasion to express ourselves,
Thank
to
you,
have our
Jackie.
voices heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This was such an important account, and we have it recorded. It's very important that we read this over and learn from it. It's your work. First, the description. I know probably you can't understand what I'm saying, but anyway, the description of is so important. And then also your work. I'm so glad you spoke, and that I can read French. I'll read this report. My goodness. Thank you. Our third speaker is, thank you so much. Our third speaker is Caroline Uscapedo Olesiawe, and she is Executive Director from the Noble Delta Women for Peace and Development in Nigeria, international from Nigeria, and Widows Alert for Empowerment, and also the GCAP Africa representative. And you have some slides that you're going to show, Caroline, right? Okay.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from here in Bangkok, where I'm presently attending this meeting. Just a quick introduction, the Noble Delta Women for Peace and Development International was formerly known as Niger Delta Women's Movement for Peace and Development. It's ECOSOC accredited and also accredited with the United Nations Environment Program, the UNFCCC, and then the CBD. So we are based in Delta State, Nigeria, with a vision to empower the Niger Delta women and for the realization and promotion of their rights. So our mission is to promote enduring peace and women's rights mobilization in the Niger Delta, focusing on women empowerment, conflict mediation, peace building, gender and climate change issues, among others. So the question I have is that when they say a widow, who is she? And a simple answer is that it's a woman whose husband has died and who has not married again. So widowhood brought as widows move through their own experience of grief, loss, and trauma after the death of their spouse, they also face a lot of issues. Some of them are economic insecurity, discrimination, stigmatization, harmful traditional practices on the basis of their marital status. So the challenges of widowhood, they are quite enormous, and it has various facets in life. First of all, widows have both young and old. My experience in working in the field of widowhood made me to realize that widowhood has both old and young, and they all experience the same problems. Some of these problems, like I have said before, are economic insecurity. They face a lot of hardship, financial hardship, economic hardship. They struggle to feed, they struggle to live, they struggle to join the society. And also they are faced with discrimination, the absence of will. In the communities where we work, we realize that most of these men do not have will, and they die and leave their wives and children with no account of how their properties will be shared. And these have resulted in loss of properties to the husband's families. A lot of the children will be thrown into the streets, living while the family, they are the ones enjoying the wealth of the husbands. Then stigmatization, loneliness and depression, poor relationship with in-laws, while she, the widow, will be accused of witchcraft. There are a lot of cases where they are being accused of being responsible for the death of their spouse, what they know nothing about. Then difficulty in social interaction. She will be confined within a particular space for a specific period. We have various cultural practices. Like in my community where I am from, the widow has to mourn the husband for at least 1 year. Before she comes to show that really she is mourning. Then they have serious harmful traditional practices. They are forced to drink the water in which they used in washing the body of the man. They forcefully, and they force them to do all manner of things. So with all this, being that Niger Delta women will work for women's rights protection, We saw the problems and the challenges of widowhood within the region. And then we looked into how to get support for widows through our human rights programs. And first was during our quest for support for widows to provide human rights support, we gave several empowerment programs and many others, including health support. In 2015, we commenced the Widows Empowerment Project in the Niger Delta. An initial program started with the provision of foodstuff, clothes, and water to indigent widows across Delta states. We enter into partnership for the Widows Alert Project with the Delta State government. In order to sustain the Widows Project, a partnership was reached with the Delta State Widows Welfare Scheme in 2019. And the program, which was supported by the World Bank through the state government, has a coordinating office and a state coordinator who pilots the affairs of the scheme. First was enumeration exercise, which was conducted to ascertain the widows, their status, and their statistics. Total number of 20,107 widows were enlisted through this project in 2020. Some of the projects carried out were payment of monthly stipends of 10,000 naira to each widow. Then we have skill acquisition training for widows on catering, tailoring, soap making, hairdressing, and makeups. Then we occasionally do Yuletide presentation of foodstuffs and incentives to all widows that are enlisted. There is presentation of starter packs to young and indigent widows to enable them start a new business. Then we also do financial support for small-scale businesses for the widows. Those who are widows that sell, do petty trading, they are supported with financial support like 50,000 naira, 100,000 and above, depending on the size of your business. Then also we do celebrate key moments. Every year we bring widows together in June to celebrate the International Widows Day. And this has made them to feel as part of the society. A lot of widows look up to this day to celebrate the key moments. So these photos I shared here, they are different occasions. The first one is the presentation of gift items where the widows were coming out one by one to come and have their Yuletide rice and maybe foodstuff for Christmas period. Then we have the Widows Day celebration, which is the picture in red and all that, where we did the 2021 International Widows Day in Asaba Delta State. Then this is cross-section of widows from across Delta State with the starter packs that are being presented to them. You see sewing machines, some are grinding machines, some are catering equipment, and all that are being presented to them to support their livelihood. So finally, I want to end with a quote that said, "No woman should lose her status, livelihood, or property when her husband dies." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline, and also for the slides. And the work you're doing is marvelous, and we should all know about it. It is so important. Our next speaker is Diana Kamande, HSC, founder, executive director of Come Together Widows and Orphans Organization from Kenya. Is she here?
Yes, I'm here. Don't know why my screen is misbehaving. I have some slides to share, but in the meantime, I can introduce myself and what we do. I was given a topic about Somali widows in Kenya. but constituency of widows in Kenya. The widows that we work with are from the 47 counties in Kenya because Widowhood does not select. It is 10 years ago, and we will be celebrating our first 10th anniversary this year. I mean, our first decade of this work this year. So the impact of migration, marginalization, and poverty on rural women and widows is very real. It's something that let's go. Marginalization of widows is very real. Next slide. And we have been able to do a lot of this work. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. First of all, I wanted to ask myself and also ask ourselves, who are Somali widows in Kenya, the status of Somali widows in Kenya? How does migration affect Somali widows in Kenya? How does marginalization affect rural women and Somali widows in Kenya? My fifth question is, how does poverty, how do migration, marginalization, and poverty widows? And number 7, I also asked myself, I know a question that is frequently asked, what measures has Kenyan government taken to address challenges faced by Somali widows and rural women in Kenya? Next slide. And the reason as to why I want us also to look at the measures is because I know there is some 2015, and I can tell the government is doing a lot of work. Somali widows in Kenya are vulnerable and marginalized group because of their refugee status. Most of the Somali widows are in the northeastern part of Kenya, and you find them in a county known as the county of Wajir. I was in Wajir County. The last time I was in Wajir County was in November last year during the 16 days of activism, because we also don't overlook the gender violence that is affecting widows in Kenya and also widows of the world. So I was there and I was able to see what is happening to the Somali widows. Most of them are from a polygamous background. You know, our Muslim brothers and sisters, in the Quran, it's allowed that a man can marry up to 4 wives. So when a man dies, he leaves up to a maximum of 4 wives. And if this man had divorced and had decided to marry again, so then you find there are those wives that he had divorced, and there are those wives that he leaves. He dies and leaves them when they were still married, they were living together. So you find that to help them address so many challenges that they face due to migration, marginalization, and poverty, Somali with support from the Kenya government, external government, local communities, and also different partners and different stakeholders. Next slide. We also see the status of Somali widows in Kenya. I'm not going to go through it, but I'm just going to say, as an organization, we were able to lobby government in 2018 towards the end so that widows could be counted, something that we did, and we wrote to our government through the Ministry of Public Service and Gender, and our PS was able to pick this up, and the widows were counted during the last census, which happened in 2019. So the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, because these are the statistics that we can only rely on, statistics that government has given, it estimates that the proportion of women who are widowed in Kenya is approximately 7.4%. And the reason as to why we were able to do this, the 7.4% of the female population in Kenya is widowed, and you find the Somali widows are also included there. Critical, and there is no move you can make without data. Slide number 6, please. 7, so that is the impact that you can see from the pictures. you find that they are always forced to flee from conflict and insecurity from homeland. Many Somali widows and their daughters have sought refuge in Kenya, while migration can offer the hope of safety and a better life. It has also created significant challenges for these women and their families, which include, I'm not going to go through everything, loss of social support network. So when they lose the social support network and they reach out to us, or we are able to reach out to them through our different ways of reaching out to widows, we are able to help them to build social capital. And this social capital that they build it through forming the groups. And once they form the groups, because when they lose their social support network, they get more support network now from the groups that they form. And when they're in those groups, their needs are still very high. And it's out of such needs that we found ourselves reaching out to Global Fund for Widows, which has been our greatest partner in economic empowerment. And this economic empowerment that we have partnered with the Global Fund for Widows, known as Widow Savings and Loans Association, it has helped the widows not only to go and borrow money and do business. You find that these widows who did not have a social support network, they're able to get a social support network such that you find even after they are done with their group meetings, they are done with their WISALAs, the Widow Savings and Loans Associations meetings, they even don't want to go home because they have built a new network. You find that they are also exposed to new challenges, stigma, discrimination, language barrier, social cultural differences, which they are not able to cope with. But with time, because they are organized into groups, we are able to help them. We are also able to write to government. We have an MOU with government and different ministries, because the widowhood issue does not only lie in the Ministry of Gender in Kenya, but we have partnership with the Ministry of Public Service. We have a partnership with the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, because widows once come, and they're Somali widows who come and end up in Kenya, or they were just bordering Somali, because Wajir has Somali, Kenya, and there is Somali widows at the border. So we are able to help them. And they are sometimes forced they are sometimes found into sexual exploitation. And when they're found into sexual exploitation, you find they will end up even introducing their daughters. So we also have a psychosocial support that we get from quite a number of counselors that has partnered with us. So we are able to help them, because they have no means of paying school fees and everything else. So we're able to rehabilitate them and reintegrate them. And by doing this, we help them now to find themselves again, because once they find themselves in the risk of violence and sexual exploitation, it's like they don't know who they are. They are trying to figure out where they were kind of lost. So when they're trying to figure out this, we get them into our groups, and we are able to help them to at least do life reentry again, and even start small businesses. Next slide. The interventions by the Kenya government, I'm just going to mention, I'll not go through. You have also organizations that have helped in curbing the impact of migration among Somali widows and their daughters. We have found out the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. It has really intervened, and recently they had invited us to share with them. Actually, we was supported to go to Geneva, and we had this topic, especially about the daughters and what can be done and the interventions that needed to be made. We also have the Kenya Police Service. The Kenya Police Service, it has a presence in Kakuma and Dadaab refugee camps, and is responsible in maintaining law and order. And we have also been able to share about the plight of widows with our police through our Inspector General of Police in the headquarters. And we are still continuing to empower the police so that they can start dealing with widows in a very good way, because their work is to maintain law and order. So they will be able to help the widows whenever somebody is trying to break law. We also have the Refugee Act, which is the main legal framework that governs the refugee protection in Kenya. Next slide. Okay, other interventions that I've been able to mention, I'm not going to go through them, but I'm going to share this presentation later. So we have other interventions like which are community-based organization support. I've mentioned quite a number of our partners like Haki Yetu, Women in Action, Womenkind, Somali Women Solidarity Organization, whom we work together very closely, especially when we have these cases of Somali widows. Next slide, please. Impact of marginalization on rural women and Somali widows is the next thing I'm going to speak about. Please, let's go to the next slide. Due to their gender and cultural background, rural women and Somali widows are often disadvantaged in terms of access to resources, decision-making, power and participation in community affairs. So you find there is low participation in decision-making processes because sometimes rural women are considered to be illiterate. So we have been able to bridge this gap by ensuring that we go to the grassroots women. We don't meet the women in hotels and in the big conference rooms in Nairobi, which is the capital city of Kenya, but we endeavor into going to the grassroots to meet these women. Inadequate access to basic services. So you find some of them, they lack basic services. And one which is key is family planning. And this is the one that opened our eyes, especially for the young widows, because you'll find that they have their needs, their sexual needs, and you'll find they still, some of them you'll still find them giving birth. So we were able to partner with Ministry of Health, and this is when we realized the widowhood issue has to take the multi-sectoral approach so that we can be able to deal with some of these issues that are affecting the widows. Gender disparity is another issue. So we find marginalization denies the daughter of Somali widows an opportunity to access education. But once we are able to bring them to the groups, we have been able to reach out to different leaders like the women representative who have the national government affirmative action fund in Kenya, which has got grants for widows, and it also has bursaries for school-going children. Next slide. So interventions by the government, by the Kenyan government that help in curbing the impact of education centers. You find that the high rates of literacy have led to formation of nomadic education centers. I have been there. I've seen some of these centers, so I'm not speaking about something that is not existing. We also have the Sexual Offense Act, which was passed in 2006. That is really helpful. And we also, by this, we also had the gender and it informed the National Gender and Equality Commission to be put in place. We also have because some of these Somalis, they still practice FGM. We also have the anti-female genital FGM female board, which I sit in the board as a director. And also we have National Policy Framework for Widows in 2013. The National Policy Framework for Widows in 2013 aims to raise awareness of the issues faced by Somali widows and their daughters to promote gender equality, social justice. It also aimed at the development of the being members of the community in decision-making process that affects their lives. So you can go to the next slide. Those are some of the interventions. I'm not going to go through all of them. So we also have found that there are intervention gaps. There are still challenges in providing quality education in the nomadic education centers, such as inadequate resources, lack of qualified teachers, and insufficient infrastructure. You also find that there are more targeted programs. There is a need for more targeted programs that I'm not going to mention all of them here. Some of the rural women and Somali widows are still not aware of their legal rights and are still victims of discrimination due to cultural norms and lack of legal aid and high fees. So this one, you find that it's very important to continue going to the especially in terms of legal, and they can explain the legal rights to the widow. So this one has been very impactful when we go to the ground even if there are still gaps, because some of these organizations, they are understaffed, so they don't have enough legal rights partners. And by this, when we realize this, we have been able to extend a partnership with the Law Society of Kenya, and we are at the MOU stage. Next slide. I'm going to rush. So that is the impact of poverty on Somali widows and their daughters. It's a photo that shows what happens. Let's go to next slide, please, as I come to a conclusion. So Somali widows and their daughters suffer from additional difficulties that worsen the effects of poverty because they are refugees and they seek asylum. In this situation, poverty has made Somali widows and their daughters even more vulnerable, preventing them from realizing their full potential and engaging fully in society. So you find the reasons why. Let's go to next slide, please. I'll not read through. So let me end here then because of time. Other impacts of poverty, they include all that is listed here. So they find a difficulty to pay essential services like medical care, vacations, prenatal, and treatment of common illness. They live in unsanitary or dead conditions that raise risk in developing infectious diseases. They often lack access to nutritious food due to shortage of money to pay for textbook, uniform. Most daughters of Somali widows have been compelled to leave school. Additionally, they have been compelled to work to support their families. So you find them going for child labor, their access to transportation and other necessities for attending school. And finally, most of their daughters have been unable to enroll in training programs that may improve their work chances and financial outlook because these programs frequently entail fees or other financial commitments. I'm sorry, my presentation was long. Let me end there because of time.
That was an amazing, amazing report, Diana. You know, as I hear these reports, I think what WPD needs to do is to take them all and to compile them and get this information out to people. This has been extraordinary. I hadn't thought much about refugee widows, which is such an important topic. Our next speaker is Christine Ayuji, and she's at the Foundation for Integrated Rural Development in Uganda. Now, this is our last speaker, and then we go into respondents. Oh, yes, if we may have something from the Ukraine, we're hopeful. Yes. Okay, so take it away, Christine.
Good evening, members. I'm Christine Ayuji. I'm from Uganda. As introduced, I work with Foundation for Integrated Rural Development. I'm also a co-founder, and I am a widow, 20 years now into widowhood. I became a widow at only 26, and it's not been an easy trip for me. I want to speak on behalf of widows and what widows go through, just to let the participants understand that widowhood is really one of those toughest things that you go through, especially when you go through when you're young and you become a widow at a young age. As already stated by some of the speakers who have spoken before me, you go through a lot. They take away your land, they take away everything that you have, the property, and as a widow, you have no voice. And when you become a widow at a young age, it's even worse. You're seen as someone who was brought into the family, and now that the boy is not there or your husband is not there, you have no voice to say anything. And in the region where I come from, which is northern Uganda, it's tough. Our region was ravaged by war for over 20 years. Many of the women became widows because their husband died in the war, and then some of them became widows because of HIV, which is also very prevalent in the northern region. And it's not really easy for us widows to be heard, because sometimes the representatives also, like in the political wing, have not been able to take out a problem and share and develop policies that are able to help widows down at the grassroots. And I felt that as a widow who became a person who became a widow at an early age of 26 and gone through widowhood now. I'm almost 50 years. I felt that I needed to bring the young widows and all the other widows together and teach them that in life, yes, it happens, but we still have to move on. But our voices have got to be heard. I actually contested for a political leadership position at one point. I've tried twice, but being a widow, it's really tough. I didn't have the money because I don't have the resources. Didn't have the support because in my country, especially in my region where I am, for you to be elected in an elected position, you have to have a husband. And if you don't have a husband, they don't take you seriously. So it was really tough. So I've taken it up to mobilize the younger widows and those other widows who are willing to get into politics and ensure that we come up with policies both at the local level, that is at the district council, and I'm glad into this position. And we have had some of the policies, some bylaws written, and they are already in operation in some of our local governments. But again, at the national level, they haven't done much. And I feel that we need more women to go into parliament to represent us, the widows. Because in Uganda, yes, we do have women representatives at various levels, at the local government, at the national level in parliament. But yes, they do just generalize the group as women. Yet we have this group of women who are widows, whose voices are not heard, with no one to speak about the problems that we go through. For example, when you lose a husband, they take away your land, they sell it off, you have children, you have no land to dig because in our place, you mostly survive on agriculture. When they take away the land, you have to rent land, you don't have them. Money up to ensure I mobilize the women. For those who have got some piece of land, at least to do agriculture. But also we have this climate change which is affecting us. In our country, we don't have something that says that maybe widows will be supported to be given something like maybe agricultural funding. So we need some funding to come around that can be able to help us. And then you find that if we can be getting some funding so that we go into this agriculture, we grow the crops, we use value addition. I've set up some groups of women in our place, our organization, and now we grow soybeans because I realize that some of our widows, they become even malnourished. They don't even have food to eat, even for their own children. So I've been encouraging them to grow maize and put in soybeans. We have some small fish, which is called silver fish, so that at least for starters, we are able to feed our children and ensure that their nutrition is good. In my area, also one thing that pains me a lot is that when you lose a husband, even as a young woman, you're forced to be inherited. And you know, it's like the family men are just waiting for you when you're not, when you're still even breathing. You haven't gotten over the loss of your husband. Somebody is really coming up and saying they want to take your hand into marriage. So I feel that many people in our society need to play a role to protect and ensure that the widows are protected and encouraging the religious leaders, the cultural leaders, the political leaders at the various levels to come up and help us, the women. We need our voices to be heard. It's really very painful that sometimes you see a house being taken away from a family. They have nothing. Land being taken away. The children don't go to school. They help. I have so much to say, but the time is so limited. I did write up my presentation. The next time I think it would be better if I'm given an opportunity to write it, then I'll be able to present it better. I've just spoken from my heart what we go through as widows. Do I still have time?
What?
Does she have time? Has she still got time?
Oh, maybe just a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Bishop,
So
yes. Thank you. Yes, 3 more minutes, 2 or 3. Thank you.
Just to wrap it up, I value women, but again, some societies, like in the place where I am, do not value women. So if you have good policies, in place, set up for the widows, because we are agricultural economy, if we can encourage and get funding, and maybe they can be able to get land where they can plant, because some of these things have forced our women and young girls to go into early marriages. Some girls have gone into the streets, and we're trying to bring them back into the community. Because we have a lot of HIV/AIDS, some of them have got affected by HIV/AIDS. So we are just trying to empower them economically. We try to bring them. We have just a few sewing machines. We have bought some free sewing machines that we now use to bring them on board to be able to learn how to do some sewing and get some money. We have also formed some youth with some women groups in our community who are widows to come up, because in our trading centers, usually they can be able to sell things like bread. So they make some bread to be able to earn a living and for themselves and the children. We have also encouraged them to go for healthcare and introduce them to and enroll them into some healthcare facilities where they provide them with the drugs that they need. And this has at least been able to save the lives of some of our widows. Sometimes they get sick, not because they probably were misbehaving, but you find your husband has died of HIV, you've been belittled in the community. We just need to be loved as widows and also feel that we are part of the community, and we also contribute to the growth of the country. And it just feels good to feel that somebody out there really cares about you. It really adds something to your life. Many of our widows are failed to send their children to school. It's tough because they don't have the money even to send their children to school. And yet with an education, you expect, even if you are a poor widow, if your child went to school, that would be able to help you in future, because you don't know where the child will be one day. It's our hope that even if a husband died, unless when you're young, you have nothing, at least you send the children to school and they're able to support themselves and also support you as their mother. I would love to see the issue of the inheritance totally removed, inheriting widows. Somebody should be able to fall in love with somebody just because they love the person, not being forced into being married. Actually not married, inheriting you, they inherit the land, they inherit the property, and even you as a woman including your inheritance. I mean, that is really horrible. It's really horrible because we are not, and then you find again, because your husband is not there, your brothers-in-law want your young girls to get married because they want to get animals out of them, because in our place, they pay dowry. And dowry is like, they're selling you, when they marry you, they pay bride price, you have to go.
She's not on me, everybody.
So they take the young girl, you still want the young girl to go to school and study, but you have your in-laws here saying, no, she's ready to get married. So I'm really trying my best. I would love to get support from people who can help. I don't know how it will be possible, but I'm praying that one day this will stop.
Thank you so much, Christine. The report from Uganda. Once again, an amazing report. All right, now we move to the Ukraine. And I think Alice is going to, oh, wait a minute, we have Regina has, Regina, how important is it, I wonder?
Yeah, let's just see.
Let's see. Regina, you have a question? It doesn't seem to be working.
Oui, bonjour à tous. J'aimerais parler du veuvage au niveau de l'Afrique centrale.
Yeah, I think Regina, I'm going to come back to you because it's important that we hear from the Ukraine.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, okay.
It's a great honor to be sharing this with Susan O'Malley this morning. And some of you I know already, and it's great to actually see you online. And yesterday I had an amazing meeting with Ludmilla, whose surname I'm afraid I can't pronounce very well, and I'll make a nonsense of it. But she was going to speak this morning, but she can't for different reasons. And so she asked if I would just talk on her behalf. Ludmilla Poroknak is president of the National Council of Women of Ukraine, and a more remarkable woman I have yet to meet at CSW this time. I was very honored to meet her in person. She is a doctor, and she's also a professor of pharmacology, and she is she leads 19 different organizations under the umbrella of the Council of Women of Ukraine. And she told me yesterday that in her house at the moment, which is not far from Kyiv, she has 12 refugees staying. And I feel that her voice must be heard somehow through me. I'm not an expert. I know so very little about widows in Ukraine, but what she did tell me was about rural widows in Ukraine. And in this event, it's important just to make one or two points. And she was saying there are many elderly widows because the men live for less years than women. For women, the average age is 72. For men, it's 62. And we've had a 9-year war, she reminded me. She's quite a character, I must say, and it was just a pleasure to hear. She did tell me was that the widows in the cities in Ukraine are doing much better than the rural widows. The reason being is that widows in Ukraine are in cities are able to get together and form groups and support each other. And I'm telling you this in a nutshell, there's far more detail. But with the rural widows, it's very difficult to for them to get together because all the connections are cut because of the war. And also, she told me something interesting, which is widows are very territorial in rural Ukraine. They don't necessarily just want to meet up with other widows. So what's been happening, and we're all trying to tell the positives here at this event, as well as the stuff that we have yet to resolve, is that the widows in the cities and towns are going out to the rural widows to show them how getting together and leaving your home can actually benefit you to meet other widows and to learn from them. It's very difficult to connect with rural widows because all the connections are down. That includes electricity and basic services, computer, access to computer. The widows in the cities have got together, they've funded money, and they've been able to purchase computers that they can take to the rural widows and help to train them. But Ludmilla told me yesterday that it's actually very difficult to get their confidence. Rural widows' confidence has been so knocked that it's very hard, even for someone like as qualified as Ludmilla, to get their confidence. They're very wary. So the other thing is that rural widows will not leave in a way that widows in cities can be persuaded. If things get too bad, they will leave. Whereas rural widows, it's extremely hard to get them to move or to change their location. They have great territorial ties, which goes into culture, it goes into history, where parents lived, grandparents lived. And also they are not used to a community culture. that was another interesting thing she said, that we take for granted, perhaps in this group, community culture, that we can meet with others. But if you are living in a conflict zone that's been going on for so long, trusting other people is a very tough thing to do. So I know that we're short of time. I just wanted, she just wanted to send her best wishes to everybody here in sisterhood, in solidarity. And so that's me. And thank you so much for listening.
We're sharing a computer, the two of us.
In sisterhood.
Now we move to respondents. And I can't wait. I hope Lopa's still here. I can't wait to hear what Lopa is going to say in reaction to this, and how UN Women might be involved with furthering the plight of widows and the victories of widows. Lopa.
Thank you very
Executive Coordinator of the Generation Equality Forum and Director of the Civil Society Division at UN Women, and an amazing, amazing leader. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Susan. And thank you to all of the speakers who have gone before me for your very, very informative and deeply moving presentations. I want to start by thanking Widows for Peace Through Democracy and GCAP for convening this very, very important discussion. We have heard a lot through these last several minutes that we have all been spending together. We have heard deeply moving accounts and deeply informative accounts of the experiences of the devastating loss, the stigma and discrimination, the poverty, the harmful practices, the sense of erasure, the different sectors in which they live and in the different situations they find themselves in, including through the other deeply excluded intersections or conditions that exist in society. So being excluded as widows, but also the other aspects, such as if they are Black, if they are Indigenous, if they are LGBTIQ+, if they are relatives, if they are, young widows, child widows, living in rural areas, etc. So I am not going to go into all, to repeat what we have heard around the economic insecurity, the social inclusion, and the political invisibility that widows face. I am instead going to talk a little bit about what is the way ahead, and also what is the connection with the priority theme of this year's CSW. So in turn, the fact that we now have a UN resolution gives us the framework, the legal and policy framework to advance critical action. And I'm going to propose a set of who are activists, for all of us who are policymakers, and for all of us who are stakeholders for whom this issue should be front and center. So first, the first and most important issue is to make visible women and girls who are widows. The more than 258 million widows are today invisible. And so the first task of making visible is through the presence and development and investment in reliable, globally comparable data that is disaggregated, that measures the conditions and reflects the realities of widows wherever they live. So reliable, globally comparable data disaggregated by age, sex, income, race, ethnicity, migratory status, disability, geographical location, etc., so that we have the full picture of the status of widows and the information gaps that currently exist in terms of their absence in censuses and in data on household consumption, etc. So that there is a way to measure the economic, social, and political exclusion. So that to make widows visible, number one. Number two, to make widows visible through representing their voices and their leadership in spaces such as this, but even beyond, in all of the spaces where conversations on addressing inequality are taking place, to be able to center stage the voices, the experience, and the leadership that widows are taking in the communities in which they are living. So to be able to center stage their voices and experience so that there is attention and visibilization of that. Number three, to be able to create and community support that are necessary to build cohorts of widows and their experience and amplifying that. We have heard through several of the presentations earlier about the need for community, the need for solidarity. And so both the emotional need for community and solidarity, but also the political importance of having cohorts of voices and the visibility that creates. The second big area that I want to talk about is policy actions. Policy actions need to focus on, number one, social and economic reforms that improve widows' access to economic opportunities, to social services, and to political engagement opportunities. To having political voice, whether in the local community, in grassroots spaces, in local government, in national, and of course in international spaces. Having the political voice to be able to demand both visibility and then services is absolutely critical, and to be able to create those opportunities through deliberate political action is very, very important. Second is to be able to include a much stronger focus on work that is already happening. There is a big body of work that is happening on rolling back and ending discriminatory laws. So all of the discriminatory laws that exist that exclude and discriminate and stigmatize widows to be currently, for example, we pay attention to different buckets of discriminatory laws around family, discriminatory laws around property, discriminatory laws around inheritance, to be always, as we are looking at those laws, to be able to always draw attention to the ways in which these are affecting widows and their exclusion through legislative frameworks. And third, as I've already spoken of, in making visible through data, therefore policy action of investment in that data. And then the third we're doing here, but to be able to have the advocacy because we now have a resolution, but the advocacy that can then draw attention to this within the frameworks that exist, such as the Sustainable Development Goals, a very important framework because it critically addresses the issue of leaving no one behind, and therefore to look at the manner in which leaving no one behind affects this particular constituency of women and girls. Let me turn now to the priority theme of this year's CSW. This year's CSW directs us to the powerful levers of innovation and technology and how technology and innovation that are at this point in time exacerbating gender inequality, including the deep inequalities faced by widows. At the same time, we know that technology is opening new doors for the empowerment of women and girls, and the digital age represents an unprecedented opportunity to both create new ways, but also to create new ways of the CSW. Innovations and technology can provide widows, and in particular those in areas that are harder to reach, but that can be connected through technology. It offers the opportunity to look at innovative ways of creating livelihoods and creating inclusion. But it is critical that as we look at the agreed conclusion, that these technologies are accessible and affordable to all women and girls, and in particular, in this context, widows. So technology and innovation must be leveraged to create programs of delivery, service delivery, as well as assistance for rural widows, including school and public education programs and programs that are able to address stigma of internet can provide women with access on markets, health, education, and other essential services. We already know that many services by governments have gone online, and therefore the ability of this information to be accessible to widows will enable widows to also be able to demand the services that they are entitled to. Of course, technology can provide widows with new economic opportunities, including, of course, online marketplace, but also the ways in which to create information communities and to be able to create solidarity communities. And technology is also an opportunity to be able to leverage data tools so that we have better understanding of the demographic information that is necessary to make the condition of widows visible. And finally, therefore, in conclusion, let me say that there is nothing that can replicate the expertise and lived experience of widows speaking for themselves, for what they experience, what they demand, and what they see as solutions. And therefore, the space for that to be created, and then the data for that to be measured will need to continue to be prioritized. Thank you very much. It has been a deeply learning experience for me, and I look forward to engaging with you as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lopa, for your energy and your reveals in the chat is addressed to you. And it says, could UN Women sponsor and put together a program to take these ideas forward in partnership with civil society, active with widows at the grassroots and globally? So that is from Sylvia Beals for you to consider. But thank you so much. Now, we only have left about 25 minutes, and Margaret has to give us and have at least ten minutes. I want to hear very much from them. One is the first one is Jemmy Falayo from Liberia.
Yes.
And so if each of those could take about 7 minutes, because there must be time for Margaret, because she's inspirational.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I don't think I'll take much time because much of what I had to say has been said, but I'm so elated with what I've heard. And widowhood, as we all know, it's quite, it's something that is so touching to women. And what I would say is in Africa, in particular, if we're talking of rural, I can talk of semi-rural and typical village rural, because those who are in the rural communities that are closer to government, to the government or to the center of government, they experience things differently from those who are really embedded in the culture. They live with the tradition, and it is difficult. And since they can't get messages across to them, it is very difficult. Even those who work with them, at times, it is so tedious going there to help change their mentality. And most of our governments, if I'm talking in particular, the government of Cameroon, I don't think that a lot is being done to help the widows, because it is a cultural thing and they live it, it is within the culture, and so they continue to do what they are doing. But I've heard a lot here today, which is so enticing and which is so helpful, that is going to be, as an inspiration for those of us who have been trying to see what we can do with widows, trying to bring in the government, because they are like laws to enact them, to make sure that they are active. We don't really have that active laws within our government. You see women, widows, you see them suffer, and they are all on their own because they are not being backed. And even us women, we have decided that we're going to make their voices heard, but not all of us. The women who have gone into the government, who should be loud in the, and it's as if they've gotten mixed up with the politics of the place, and so they've forgotten the initial goal which took them to that assembly, to represent these women. So they go now, and because of party politics, they want to toe the line and follow what the government is saying to support the government so that they don't lose their seats in government, which is very wrong. And that is one of the problems we have, especially in Cameroon. NGOs, the organizations that work for women, they are so, there are so many, so diverse, and with diverse interests. All of them have different interests that they portray. And so coming together as a voice to loud these women's problem is difficult. So we go and help women. Yes, we help them as individual groups, but what do we do to bring them, to project them that is being heard? Just as what I've heard when what Lopa said, it is for all of us to come together, make these voices, bring these problems together. And the important thing is that data. I'm so impressed because it is important, if we are working with any group of women, let us get the data, and concrete data, not just data which is, which can be justified. Transparency, accountability, sustainability is what we should be looking for when we are working with these women in data. ACWW that I work for, they are on the ground. Yes, we give them information, but they cannot cover every place. They cover just the groups that are within them. And these groups work just with a minority of the widows. So the problems of widows continues to exacerbate because they don't have many people reaching out to them, especially those villages that are really embedded with tradition and that are really far from the government seats, and they lack all this technology. They don't have internet, they don't have lights. It is so difficult even to transmit messages to them. Even if you go there and do anything, we cannot continue. Accessibility, the roads are equally not even good to reach some of those rural areas. So
thank you.
One thing I really say is, for our voices, come together as women, stand up for the women, let our voices be heard. And I think with that, we'll be able to get a message across to the government. And I think the United Nations too, I will ask of them, if those they are working with, there should be true accountability, because when you work and you rely on some of the people, on the some of the people in the areas within which you work, some of them might not be giving you concrete data because they can't even access what they just superficially give information from what they have gathered from the people, the networks they have, who don't even reach the real people who are the target population. But they come up because of finances, they just want to do that.
This is wonderful. Voices of women need to come together, yes, to move forward. Thank you. And then Yemi, are you here? You are, right? Is she?
Yes, I'm here.
Just for, good. For a few minutes, so Margaret will sum up. Oh, Yemi, here you are. Excellent.
Yes, I am. Thank you. I won't be speaking for long. I think this so much. They've given us quite some information, particularly as regarding what we should be doing and what we can do. I thank you all for this insightful conversation. This is a personal, so I really do, it's something that is very close to my heart. I will want to build, I don't want to repeat what the other speakers have said because it has resonated very deeply, particularly as it relates to who are they, where are they, and finding data that needs to drill down, particularly as it relates to leaving no one behind. You know, widows are people that we normally leave behind, but no, because many of them are caregivers to other vulnerable groups like young children, young girls, and hence the cycle continues if it's not broken by some kind of external intervention. I would also want to speak on the issue of not just finding data for widows and advocating for widows, but where the entry point I want to use on this conversation of widows to advocate for strategic elements. I mean, the two case studies which I want to bring to the table is here in Liberia. Liberia is a post-conflict country. It's what we can even term as even it of the other. And really, who brokered peace in at the height of conflict and at the height of the crisis? It's the women whose husbands have died due to war, the women who have become widows and female-headed households, who, as a matter of survival, had to broker peace. And it is in that crisis they found voice, they garnered, and they came together, defying all the geographical or ethnic diversities, and they came together for the sake of a common good, and they brokered peace in these two countries. So that means that, I mean, apart from just looking at the vulnerabilities of widows, we really need to look at their strengths, which is their voice and what they bring to the table. Politica has said many times when they want to get votes, they go to the vulnerable. They give them a little bit here, a little bit there, and they garner their votes. How can we build their capacity that their voices count, not just when it's crisis, but in times before Christ, so that they can actually self-advocate and self-mobilize and advocate for issues even beyond just widowhood and the vulnerabilities of widows. We've seen this in Liberia, we've seen this in Rwanda, and I really do think that as part of the leadership, as part of the voice, as part of the reforms, we really need to build capacity to advocate. Now, the technology has made it much easier. Technology has made it more easier for their voices to be heard, but many of them don't even have access to these technologies or simple technologies. How can we ensure that we amplify their voice, put them together, amplify their voice for common good, even in these times that we're in? I won't say much more than that. I love the overview that the presentation from Ukraine, that, you know, people tend, at the rural areas, they tend to be territorial. I mean, it's all across the world, particularly when there's a scarcity mindset and there is evidence of scarcity. How can we help them break that mindset so that they can continue to collaborate? And like the widows of Ukraine, be our sister's keeper. They took technology to the women in the rural areas, and they were able to use them to amplify their voice further. Thank you so much. I've spoken within the time I can. I will not go beyond that, and thank you for giving me the floor. Oh.
Thank you, Yemi. This was wonderful, inspirational, and our voices need to come together and move this agenda. And now we have Margaret, who's going to speak to us. Margaret Owen is the founder of WPD. She has done amazing work in widows. And also, I must say, in terms of Kurdish people too, was where I first met Margaret. Margaret, I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Please take it away, Margaret.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm finding it almost too difficult to speak because of what I've been hearing from all of you, because it's been both moving and heartbreaking, and at the same time extraordinarily encouraging because of what you are all doing in your countries to give widows a real voice that is heard by your governments at every level, national government, district government, and local governments at the grassroots. Mostly we've heard from you countries in Africa, but let us telling and situations, experiences of widows in South Asia, in the Middle East, in Latin America, in many, many countries, in China. Look at what is happening to the widows of the Uyghur widows in China. Wherever we look, even in my own country, widows are invisible. 32 years ago. And that was when I woke up to the issues of widowhood, when a young Malawi woman came into my house in London and looked round before she'd even sat down in astonishment. She said, "You mean your husband's brothers let you stay here and keep all these things?" And I'm a human rights lawyer, and I'd headed law and policy at International Planned Parenthood. I'd been all over the world, the state issues. So it did ring some bells, but really not enough, because that opened me up to having to look at what was happening to widows in these countries that I've been to, where nobody talked about it at all. What you have told us today is the common experiences of widows in so many different countries. You're all talking about how widows who are of all ages, grandmothers, young mothers, child widows, almost babies could be widows if they are married or even betrothed before they're born, and how they all face such extraordinary and harrowing violence, harmful traditional practice that they should like shackles. Whatever the law or constitutions of countries say, whatever international laws say, such as this on discrimination against women, in so many countries, widows are outside these laws. I mustn't spend too long because we've got to talk about what we need to do now. But Lopa, thank you so much, Lopa, if you're still there, for the way you so concisely said it has to be done. Because we need now action and not words. And I'm talking in the second week of the Commission on the Status of Women, in which we're looking at the review theme about rural women, and we're talking about rural widows. And I do hope that at the end of this week, agreed conclusions from this 67th session on the Commission on the Status of Women will at least mention and talk about widows when they make those lists. Well, there's not on the zero draft, it wasn't mentioned. And whenever we disaggregate data, we must add marital status. And the other thing I want to say, I wrote a lot of notes, but I'm now just talking and not looking at my notes. We're talking about widows and the explosion in the number of widows. That number that Lopa mentioned, 285, that was something that came up 20 years ago. It's probably triple that number today because it's conflict as well as COVID that were widow creators. And what happened in conflicts? You divide the men and boys, probably kill or disappear them, and then you rape or sexually enslave the women and girls. So as well as talking about widows, we've half widows whose lives may be even more wretched for their closer than the full widows. The half widows are the women who don't. Are they in prison? Are they? And they are in absolute limbo. There's no closure for them at all. So don't forget half widows. Yes, we have to fill the gap in data. Yes, we have to ensure that governments are made accountable for condoning the discrimination, violence, and stigma that happens to widows. We've heard about all these appalling mourning and burial rites. Elderly widows being stoned to death as witches, widows being treated as chattels. We've heard all these stories. I now want to say what we really have to do.
Not really with it at all.
Sorry. Can I go on? We need to have the Security Council ensure that widows are on their women, peace and security agenda. We want UN Women, please, to have a special desk, if you would, on widows, and maybe to actually support having regional conferences on widows. We'd like to see one in Africa. We've had some in South Asia, in Latin America, in the Middle East, because there are more and more widows and we need to hear their voices. And a way to do that is through regional conferences. We'd like to have the Security Council commission a special report on widowhood and appoint a special rapporteur on women in conflict, rather like Russell's report on. The end of November, my Foreign and Development Office hosted a conference on preventing sexual violence in conflict, and there was nothing about widows. We tried like mad to have a panel on widows, and again, that was discrimination. It wasn't there, and yet there are millions of widows, as in the Congo, who are actually sexual violence in conflict. And then about, yes, this is all about how we can use the digital mechanisms. We've got to actually help those rural widows to become not just literate, but also fluent in using the digital, because it's a way that we can get they can know about their rights. We need much more support from governments and maybe from the World Bank, from the Security Council, so that actually all governments are criminalize all those acts that discriminated against widows and actually the violence. I think Malawi, Ghana, and Tanzania have got that in their penal code, but it's all very well to have laws when they're not implemented. We've got to do everything we can to ensure now that we've got a UN General Assembly resolution on the treatment of widows, that it's implemented. And how can it be implemented unless we hear widows' voices? So there has to be support and funding and capacity building and training so that widows everywhere can form their own associations. We've heard that there are refugee and IDP camps, and now there are sometimes as much as 80% are women and children, and maybe 60% of those are widows. In my own what's cause appalling suffering. I was terribly interested to hear about the Somali widows in camps in Kenya. And I think everywhere there are widows displaced by war who are IDPs and refugees. We have to be sure then that there is a CEDAW will have a general recommendation on widows. Maybe the violence against widows and the violence against women everywhere really demands that we actually see the UN adopt our draft Every Woman Treaty, because maybe the CEDAW, 43 years old, is now rather dusty and out of date to actually address a whole new those, which includes cyber violence. I think that we have to actually establish many more networks so that widows can share their best practice. It's amazing to hear what you're all doing, but what you're doing, the best practice that you are using has to be shared wherever we can. And that's why, again, it's so important that widow groups become fluent in using the internet and using all those digital mechanisms that can actually ensure that your voices are heard everywhere. And then widows have got to be in decision making at every level, whether it's at a national government, district and local government. They must be there. 1325, why I think Nepal is the only country in its national action plan for 1325 that actually said you have to have widows at peace accords. Why are the widows not in all these peace accords? It's they who bear the brunt of conflict, but they are never women anyway, are never in the decision making to go to war, to make conflicts. And also we know that as well as conflict being a widow maker, COVID was a widow maker, because many more men died in the pandemic than women. And when there were these lockdowns, we've heard from some of you, widows again were victims of terrible abuse and violence by their in-laws. What else can I say? I think I've really come to the end, but this is a wonderful conference. I'm sorry that many, many more people, I wanted 1,000 people to listen to you all, but as it's recorded, maybe we can send it. We can send it to the UN Security Council. There's Pramila Patton, who's also on the Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict about Stigma. We can send it to the victims Under Secretary General at the UN. I really think that everything that you said is just so important. And I hope that when we get to the end of the CSW, for the first time, we'll have much more about widows in it. So there's still time for all of you to lobby your governments to ensure widows visible again. It's appalling that they should be. So, and my question to all of you is, which I'm asked again and again and again, why is there such reluctance at the international level and at government level, at government's level? Why is there such reluctance to hear the voices of widows? Because widowhood is the most neglected of all gender and human rights issues. And it's the treatment and experiences of widows that is the root cause of expanding and extending poverty across the generations. It's a key driver of taking girls out of school into early marriage. And it's this inequality and poverty caused by the treatment of widows that actually fuels future conflict. And my last words is begging all of you to look at the Kurdish women's revolution model, which is a brilliant one for all our countries, the global south and the rich and the Western countries everywhere, because that ensures, it's amazing, that women's empowerment and gender equality is central, not a little thing on the fringe. And in their model, every single decision-making body, whether it's the army, the police, the national thing, every organization has co-chairs, a man and a woman. And I wish that when America appoints the next president of the World Bank, wouldn't it be wonderful if it was a man and a woman were co-presidents of the World Bank, if a man and a woman were presidents of the Security Council, of the International Criminal Court, of the European Court of Human Rights. That's all I can say. I am so impressed by everything I heard today. And I just hope that lots and lots of people who were not here with us at this meeting now will actually be able to hear the recording and learn from it and act on it. And thank you, Lopa Banerjee, for coming on from UN Women. And let's see, please, a special UN Women desk, because you can help us do all these things that we want to do. Thank you very much indeed.
We have, I think, a minute left or 2 minutes. This event has been extraordinary, better than I ever imagined. I learned so much, and the energy, the ideas. Now, this is recorded, and also the chat is being saved. So we need to build on this to harness women's voices, the voices of widows, to start making change. But there's wonderful stuff in the chat, and I thank you. I thank you. Anyway, goodbye. I hope we all meet again soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, and thank you, all of you.
Yes. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank
Au
you.
revoir.